What's up, guys? Today, we're diving into some serious stories straight from Reddit. These are the kinds of tales that'll have you looking over your shoulder and questioning everything. So grab a snack, get comfy, and let's dive in. Heaven might not be what you think. With apologies to the religious, I feel my story must be shared. In 2003, when I was 15 years old, my heart stopped for 6 minutes. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, during my usual walk home from the bus stop. Just 4 blocks between me and my front door, when I suddenly began to feel nauseous. It hit me without warning. I had been perfectly fine just moments earlier, eating my usual lunch, Bosco sticks and marinara sauce, something I'd had countless times. But this time was different. Out of nowhere, a cold sweat swept over me. Then came the flutter in my chest. My heart slipped into what I later learned was ventricular fibrillation. I became breathless, collapsed on the pavement. What happened after that was told to me by others. A woman driving a hatchback nearly crushed my skull as I lay in the street. She slammed on the brakes, tried to rouse me, but when she couldn't, she called emergency services. By the time EMS arrived, I was technically dead. They rushed me to the hospital, and somewhere along the way, they managed to shock my heart back to life. What followed was a weeks-long journey through the healthcare system, an ablation, a pacemaker, and mountains of debt my family is still dealing with. But my heart's alright, and thank God it is, because what I learned in those 6 minutes has shaped my life in ways I never could have anticipated. For those 6 minutes, as my lifeless body was rushed across the city with 2 paramedics working tirelessly to revive me, my soul transcended to the hereafter. And what I saw there, I wish I hadn't. It began with light, blinding, white, and pervasive. It bathed me in warmth and calm, just as they describe in spiritual experiences. A feeling of ascent filled me, like the light was pulling me upward. I passed through several gates, intangible, but their presence felt like they might have blocked my ascent had they remained closed. I arrived in a place without dimension, beyond any form of reality I knew. It made sense only while I was there, but once I returned, I couldn't fully understand it. What I experienced wasn't a clear image, but more of an impression. And I wasn't alone. At first, given my Christian upbringing, I thought they were angels. I opened my arms, expecting an embrace, a feeling of peace. But instead, I felt myself bound, shackled by their power. Like a dog with a collar, I was humiliated and terrified. These weren't the benevolent beings I had been told would await me. They were cruel, unsympathetic overlords. Why? I cried out, my soul feeling like a petulant child lost in confusion. Then, laughter. Cold and mocking. Thoughts flooded my mind like birds, moving in and out of my consciousness. They spoke of horrors, truths that I can barely comprehend even now. This universe, they said, is a farm. A farm designed to harvest souls. It's not a coincidence that our universe exists in these precise conditions. It was created. Not by gods, but by beings with no compassion, only a desire to use what they create. The Big Bang wasn't the birth of everything. It was the beginning of a system designed to cultivate life, to grow souls for use in a higher realm. There, time and space dissolve, and we exist in servitude. Our ultimate purpose is to ripen until we're ready to be harvested. 6 minutes in this afterlife felt like a lifetime. It was psychological torment beyond anything I can describe. The pain wasn't physical, but something deeper. It was soul-crushing, far worse than any physical hell. It was the kind of pain that comes when you lose someone you love, the intense, emotional agony that rips you apart from the inside. Eventually, it became clear that my time had not yet come. I was to return to the physical world, but before I left, I was told not to speak of what I had seen. If I remained silent, I'd be rewarded with a slightly improved position in their hierarchy. But if I revealed the truth, unimaginable horrors would await me. I couldn't imagine anything worse than what I had already experienced. The grief, the torment, the feeling of being trapped. For weeks, I tried to explain what I had learned to anyone who would listen. People told me I'd gone through a traumatic experience, that it had left scars on my psyche as well as my heart. But I gave up trying to convince them. I started to convince myself it had been a death dream. A figment of my mind trying to make sense of my imminent demise. Then, years later, I met someone who claimed to have met God. It happened during a book reading by an author who had written about his own near-death experience. Afterward, I asked him if he had truly met God. He smiled and nodded, assuring me that God was real and filled with love. On a whim, I decided to tell him what I had learned, the truth I had been shown. That when we die, we don't ascend to heaven. Instead, we're harvested like crops, destined for servitude. For a moment, his gaze flickered. And then I saw it, the knowledge in his eyes. He had been there. He knew what I knew, but he lied. He had experienced the truth. But for some reason, he chose to tell the world a comforting lie instead. I'm not sure what the reason was. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's the desire to protect people from the reality I saw. But I know the truth now, and it's something I wish I could forget, but I can't. I first met Lucy about 4 months ago. She came to me with what seemed like a textbook case of anorexia nervosa, low self-esteem, distorted body image, the works. But from the start, something felt off. Her family rarely engaged with therapy, even though I stressed their importance in her treatment. Twice, I cornered her parents when they came to pick her up, emphasizing how family involvement could save Lucy's life. They nodded, promised to show up, and never did. Her older sister? Never met her. Only saw photos Lucy showed me, her model sister with a flawless figure, the unattainable, ideal, Lucy was chasing. It was frustrating, to say the least. 4 months of therapy, and Lucy hadn't made much progress. I was running out of ways to help her. That's when I decided to try something different, art therapy. Lucy loved to draw, especially with charcoal, so I suggested we both sketch how we saw ourselves and each other. Maybe, I thought, it could shed some light on the distorted lens through which Lucy viewed herself. Her sketches were incredible, far more skilled than my crude attempts. But her self-portrait stopped me cold. It wasn't Lucy. The girl she'd drawn was fuller, with round cheeks, curly hair, and hazel eyes. Lucy had straight hair, sharp features, and dark brown eyes. And on the girl's cheek, a faint dark mark, almost like a scar. When I asked about the differences, Lucy was casual. "That's how I see myself in the mirror," she said. "The scar? It appeared one day and never went away." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "What do you mean? You see it only in the mirror?" She nodded. And then she said something that sent goosebumps across my skin. "The mirror shows me, her. Not me." That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Not just psychologically, but something else. I first met Lucy about 4 months ago. She came to me with what seemed like a textbook case of anorexia nervosa, low self-esteem, distorted body image, the works. But from the start, something felt off. Her family rarely engaged with therapy, even though I stressed their importance in her treatment. Twice, I cornered her parents when they came to pick her up, emphasizing how family involvement could save Lucy's life. They nodded, promised to show up, and never did. Her older sister? Never met her. Only saw photos Lucy showed me, her model sister with a flawless figure, the unattainable, ideal, Lucy was chasing. It was frustrating, to say the least. 4 months of therapy, and Lucy hadn't made much progress. I was running out of ways to help her. That's when I decided to try something different, art therapy. Lucy loved to draw, especially with charcoal, so I suggested we both sketch how we saw ourselves and each other. Maybe, I thought, it could shed some light on the distorted lens through which Lucy viewed herself. Her sketches were incredible, far more skilled than my crude attempts. But her self-portrait stopped me cold. It wasn't Lucy. The girl she'd drawn was fuller, with round cheeks, curly hair, and hazel eyes. Lucy had straight hair, sharp features, and dark brown eyes. And on the girl's cheek, a faint dark mark, almost like a scar. When I asked about the differences, Lucy was casual. "That's how I see myself in the mirror," she said. "The scar? It appeared one day and never went away." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "What do you mean?" You see it only in the mirror? She nodded. And then she said something that sent goosebumps across my skin. The mirror shows me, her. Not me. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Not just psychologically, but something else. It got stranger. I suggested taking a photo of Lucy to help her see herself as she truly was. She hesitated but finally agreed. When I snapped the picture, she gasped and doubled over like she'd been physically struck. It hurt, she whispered, trembling. Just for a second. When I showed her the photo, she flinched. I look so thin, she said, almost in disbelief. But when she turned to the mirror, her face twisted in confusion. That's not me, she murmured. She's still there. I glanced at the mirror and froze. The girl staring back at me wasn't Lucy. She was the girl from Lucy's drawing. The fuller face, the curls, the hazel eyes, the scar. But her expression, oh, her expression, it was filled with hatred. Her gaze felt like knives slicing through me. And here's the worst part, she wasn't mirroring Lucy's movements. She was glaring at me. Panic set in, but I tried to stay calm. Lucy, I said carefully. Do you see her too? Lucy nodded, tears streaming down her face. She's always there. She never leaves. My heart raced. Lucy, I whispered. This isn't an eating disorder. There's something else happening here. And then it happened. As I looked at Lucy, her face shifted. The girl from the mirror was no longer just in the reflection. She was on Lucy. Her features, her scar, her fiery hazel eyes. She grinned, a malevolent, chilling grin, and spoke in a voice that wasn't Lucy's. You can't save her, she hissed. She deserves this. She deserves to suffer like I did. I stumbled back, heart pounding, reaching blindly for the door. Lucy, or whatever had taken over her, stepped closer. You think you can fix her? You're just like the others. Useless. I fumbled with the doorknob, my mind racing. Was this some extreme dissociative episode? A psychotic break? Or was I staring at something darker, something beyond my understanding as a psychologist? Before I could think of a response, the lights flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. I still don't know what happened in those final moments. When the lights came back on, Lucy was unconscious on the floor, her face her own again. I called an ambulance and reported everything. Well, almost everything. How could I explain what I saw? Who would believe me? Lucy's family finally showed up at the hospital. They were strangely calm, almost dismissive. And as they walked away, I caught a glimpse of her older sister's face. The same curls. The same hazel eyes. And a faint scar on her cheek. I don't know what I saw in that mirror. But I know one thing. Lucy wasn't the only one haunted. Lately, I've been waking up feeling completely drained. No matter how early I went to bed, it felt like I hadn't slept in days. Getting out of bed for work became almost impossible, which was strange for me because I was always someone with high energy. A few hours of sleep was usually enough to keep me going. I couldn't figure out what was happening. I went through a barrage of tests, but even my doctor couldn't find anything wrong with me. The only recent change in my life was my boyfriend, Steven, who had moved in. This was the first time I'd ever shared a bed with anyone. Steven was the first real love of my life. This was my first serious relationship, and I didn't want to spoil it by asking him to sleep in the spare room. I enjoyed having him around. He always made a big deal out of me, bringing me chamomile tea every night before bed. One night, I woke up with a sharp, pulsating pain in my hip that shot up the right side of my body. I jumped out of bed, nearly collapsing as I struggled to get to the bathroom. Steven, can you get in here? I called out in pain. A huge dark bruise covered my hip, almost as if I'd been hit with a metal bar in my sleep. What's wrong? Steven asked, rushing in. Did I fall out of bed or something? Steven had a strange expression on his face, almost guilty. Probably. I don't know, he said dismissively. That response didn't sit right with me, and my mind started spiraling with a million questions. This isn't normal, Steven. I think something's wrong with me. Well, you should probably see a doctor then, he said coldly, quickly walking out of the bathroom. I went to see my doctor, who suggested I see a specialist who could rule out something more sinister. On the way to the hospital, Stephen was still dismissive. I'm sure it's nothing. You're probably just stressed from work. People don't wake up with bruises from stress, I thought angrily to myself. The doctor ran some tests, including a stress test, and though the results came back clear, I still felt like something was seriously off. I'd prescribe you sedatives, but your blood work shows you're already on nitrazepam, the doctor said. I was stunned. I've never taken any sedatives, I replied. The doctor looked at me, confused. No, you definitely tested positive for nitrazepam. It's a powerful sedative. I was dumbfounded, unable to process it. How could this be? That evening, as I sat in bed, my mind raced. How could I have tested positive for a drug I hadn't taken? Then, Stephen walked in with my chamomile tea. As I was about to drink it, the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My boyfriend was drugging me. With a surge of panic, I emptied the cup into the sink and crawled back into bed. Was it hot enough for you? Stephen asked, climbing into bed beside me. Perfect as always, I lied, feeling like I was lying next to a stranger. I felt a wave of terror as I wondered, had I ever truly known him? The next morning, I woke up again with aches all over my body, as if I'd been in a fight. Stephen was nowhere to be found, and the room was a mess. I knew something was terribly wrong. I needed evidence if I was going to go to the police. I bought a hidden camera and set it up in the bedroom, aimed at the bed. The next night, I woke up, exhausted as usual. This time, I was ready. I opened my laptop to check the footage. For the first couple of hours, nothing happened. Then I saw it. At first, I couldn't believe what I was watching. It was like I was watching a horror movie. There I was, crawling up the bedroom wall, like something possessed. I continued to crawl across the ceiling, looking down at Stephen, ready to pounce on him. Stephen woke up, but he didn't seem startled. He seemed prepared. As I descended from the ceiling, he grabbed a stick from under the bed and spent the next hour fighting me off. Eventually, he subdued me, handcuffing me to the bed. I looked at the marks on my wrists, now understanding their origin. When Stephen came home that night, I ran up to him and threw my arms around him. Why didn't you tell me what you were doing to me every night? He shrugged. I thought you knew. The drugs I gave you made things easier for both of us. Why are you still with me? I asked, confused. My last girlfriend was a jealous psychopath. You're a walk in the park compared to her, he said, almost casually.